There's such a hypocrisy in the way that we approach things is all I'm saying. And that we don't need perfect people to run office, and we're never going to find them. And I think it's why so many people don't want to go into politics now, because nobody's life is perfect, right? But Andrew Carnegie also didn't have the tools that we have now to track people. They didn't have social media to say hello or try and communicate with people or try and explain themselves. Can you talk a little bit about the role of social media in covering wealth and how the ultra-rich actually use it?
Yeah, you can't imagine this world as it is today without the fact that there is social media there, which both makes them visible and then also can make them voluble if they want to be. Mm-hmm. And that means that they are, in a sense, sort of in this constant competition with the public about who gets to define them. And so there are, at one point, for instance, in Zuckerberg's case, there was a pollster brought in to do very quietly, doing public surveys about the public attitudes about him. And, they would do things like even market test what videos he had from his home and from his backyard to see how did they score on social media. And look, in a way, this is the world they created. And so they're very knowledgeable about how important it is. It reminds me of something else that was very interesting to me. I interviewed Steve Huffman, who was the founder of Reddit, the CEO. And he, at one point, he said, I remember in the early days of the financial crisis that we began to see signs of it in the comments on Reddit before it was even a full-fledged public issue, because social media is a canary in the coal mine. It's an indicator of where things are going. And that makes them both very alert to trends, but also I think it can be quite anxiety-producing. He actually, as a matter of fact, he is one of the people who has done this process of preparing for the end of the world. Huffman told me that he had gotten eye surgery to get rid of the need for contact lenses or eyeglasses so that he wouldn't be dependent on them in the event of doomsday.
Does he have a prepper bunker?
He told me that he has motorcycles and guns and ammo and things like that. And look, it's one of the things I write about in here is this culture of doomsday prepping among the very rich, which has kind of popped up, is fascinating because Silicon Valley, of course, is a place that positions itself in the public consciousness as the most optimistic. We are the solvers of problems. We are the makers of history. But actually that instinct to say, I have to protect myself, as another CEO in Silicon Valley said to me, I keep a helicopter gassed up all the time and I have an air filtration system in the bunker in my basement. I went to New Zealand to see some of these refuges. And I think in a way, what's happened is that as they've created these tools, because they know how powerful these tools are, they also know how quickly things can slip out of control and how vulnerable they are, how many points of failure they have. Another CEO said to me at one point, he said, sure, I think it's a little bit silly, but it's probably not unreasonable to make these preparations because what are the chances that sometime in the next 50 years, these systems won't fail enough that we'll find ourselves with the lights off? That's a paraphrase.
It feels like it would be a great drama to have a super yacht at sea and then they think they've insulated themselves from everything. They've got a year's supply of food or whatever because there's a pandemic or something going on, and then actually the danger comes from within. It's the crew.
I'd watch
It's the crew who take them out, right?
Well, actually, it's more true than you might have even known. There was a conversation here in New York at one point among some very wealthy figures, as described to me by one of the participants, where they were talking about where they would go in the event of a collapse. And as some of them said, look, it's not just about how do you get to Teterboro to get on the plane. It's what are you going to do about the pilot's family? Because if you don't bring the pilot's family, is he really going to fly you away? Or maybe worse, he's going to do something so that you don't get on that plane.
He's going to kill you and bring his family on the plane.
I guess that's season 2.
If it's that much of a calamity, then it becomes the end of us, right?
Well, these kinds of conversations, which I think, to state the obvious, are insane making. They are kind of wild, but they are the inevitable consequence of a world in which, frankly, the gap is so profoundly large between being on the winning side and being on the losing side that they come to believe that it's almost unbearable to imagine falling on the wrong side of that gap, because they can't bear the thought of it because you don't get back across that canyon. When it's your boat, you get to define the rules. I mean, there was a captain of one of these super yachts said to me he had an owner at one point who used to deliberately limit the number of newspapers on board just to watch the Masters of the Universe, who were his guests, fight over the newspapers in the morning.
Is there an enormous amount of competition between the owners of these boats? Because one is mindful of the hubris of Mike Lynch celebrating his at the end of his court case and his, whatever it was, 8-year case that the American government had against him. He was a British entrepreneur who had sold his company to HP, and then there were all sorts of problems with it. And he died after a water spout hit what was the tallest mast, apparently in the world, on his yacht. I think the yacht was rented, actually. But nevertheless, the idea of the tallest mast in the world being attracting a water spout, which then kills the people on board.
I mean, there is all kinds of Shakespearean dimensions to these stories. I think what attracted me to this as a topic is it's precisely the fusion of the concrete world, the material world, with these ideas about power and need and insatiability. And all of that is made manifest in these machines. And it doesn't happen all that often. I mean, just as a writer, I'm always looking for things like that. There was a great piece in The New Yorker, and it became a book in the 1960s, when John McPhee wrote about orange juice. Simple, orange juice. But he actually wrote about it as a metaphor for the United States in mid-century, because it was all about the innovation that allowed you to have summertime oranges in January in Minnesota. And in a way, I came to see these yachts as a kind of metaphor for now.
And then just a final point, the signaling of them.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, in the end, this is, as somebody said to me, these are all ultimately about status anxiety. And I went to the launch of a new yacht. This is a family that had saved up its hundreds of millions and put it down on a new yacht. And what was so fascinating was the CEO of the company that built it for him was already trying to sell them a bigger yacht. In his speech, he said, "Welcome to the first step on the big staircase."
So even as you buy your first big yacht, it's not big enough?
Not really, evidently.
It's not big enough.
But it's a good starter yacht.
Congratulations. It's a starter yacht. Okay, final. What was the resolution when... Because there was a story that caught fire that Jeff Bezos had a boat that was so big they were going to have to dismantle a bridge for him to get the boat out of the shipyard onto the sea. And then local people heard about this and said that they would come and they would egg the boat.
Yeah,
what
this was in the
happened to
Netherlands.
that? Yes, because isn't that where the biggest boat or the most prestigious manufacturer of boats is?
Yeah, and the Dutch learned that actually this bridge, which had survived Nazi shelling, would have to be dismantled in order to have the boat brought through, and they didn't like it. And they planned to get together and throw rotten eggs at the boat when it came through. But a solution was found, as it often is, in the dead of night, which is that they took down the tall masts of the boat, the company and the owner did, and sailed it through quietly.
Mastless.
In a sense. And then it was brought forth again after it was back out in the open sea.
Oh, thank goodness they found a solution.
I do think these little moments, the most interesting moments for me are when the interior world of the yachts collides with the world of everybody else. And you begin to see how these two can't quite speak to each other. I think it was either John Cleese or Michael Palin once said that the source of all humor is the clash of two reference systems. It's two completely self-contained views of how human affairs shall be. And when they get into conflict with each other, it can be pretty funny.
So do you predict more super yachts on the seas?
Yeah, I think these things are, until the culture around them changes, until it becomes seen as a liability for your social media image to be showing yourself on board, then the business will continue growing.
I can't help long for a small group of pirates to take over one of these ships, possibly the Cora, and just lead the ship off somewhere else?
Well, in the industry, they pay attention to one frustrating statistical fact, which is that as much as it has gone through this extraordinary boom period, it has not actually kept up with the growth of billionaires. That there are, as one designer said not long ago, there are many new tycoons who are not stepping up to the plate. And they're hoping that they can encourage them to get in the game.
This podcast was produced by Devon Rogerino and Anna von Ursen, and it was edited by Devon too.